Beneath the blazing sands of Egypt lies a hidden world where pharaohs defy death itself. The Valley of the Kings isn't just a burial ground, it's the ultimate vault of ancient power, secrets and treasures that shaped civilization. Unlocking these tombs means unravelling the mysteries of a lost empire and confronting the fragile line between history and myth. Get ready to dive deep into the greatest burial secrets ever discovered, where every stone tells a story that could rewrite what we know about eternity. Chapter 1. The Hidden Valley. It begins with silence. Not the kind of silence you find in an empty room. This is deeper. A silence stretched across a sunburned valley where time once stopped for kings. The place is called the Valley of the Kings. But long before anyone named it that, it was a secret. Hidden among dry hills and cliffs, it waited quietly for the dead to arrive. Not just any dead. Pharaohs. Gods in human form, as the people of ancient Egypt believed. 3,500 years ago, the rulers of Egypt faced a problem. Their old way of burial had become dangerous. For centuries they had built great pyramids on flat, open land. These were meant to last forever. But forever is a long time, and pyramids, tall and proud, made easy targets. Robbers saw them as invitations. Everyone knew treasures were inside. And many tombs, once filled with golden statues, sacred books and the mummies of kings, had been emptied, stripped bare, destroyed. Egypt's leaders needed a new plan. They looked to the west, to the land of the setting sun. In Egyptian belief, the sun died each night and was reborn each morning. The west was where the sun disappeared. It became the land of the dead. It made sense to look there for a safer place. The valley they chose was not an obvious one. It lay behind the cliffs on the western bank of the Nile, near the city of Thebes, now called Luxor. From a distance it looked plain, dry earth, rocky ground, no green, no water, only stone and heat. But someone noticed something that changed everything. Above the valley stood a mountain. It had a strange shape. Its peak rose in a gentle triangle, a natural pyramid, not made by man, not cut or stacked. It was made by time and wind and sand. It looked sacred. To the ancient eye it looked like a gift from the gods, a perfect place to bury one. And so the decision was made. The pharaohs would no longer be laid to rest in pyramids that rose toward the sky. Now they would be hidden underground. This valley offered more than mystery. Its location gave protection. The cliffs surrounding it made it hard to reach. There were no wide roads, no crowds, only narrow paths winding through hot stone. To anyone passing by, it looked empty. It was easy to miss. That was the idea. The dry air helped too. Egypt's desert is like a giant oven. It bakes everything. But that heat, mixed with almost no rain, meant that things buried there did not rot. Wood stayed hard. Cloth stayed strong. Paint kept its colour. Even bodies stayed nearly whole. Pharaohs believed they would wake again one day. They needed their skin, their eyes, their hands. This valley helped keep them waiting. Over time, two parts of the valley took shape. One became larger. This was the eastern side. Most of the tombs were carved here, long ones, deep ones, tunnels that led far below the ground. Inside them, walls told stories in pictures. Gods with animal heads, kings sailing across the sky, magic spells painted in bright colours, all meant to guide the dead safely to the next life. The western valley, though smaller, held its own secrets. Fewer tombs were dug there. But those few mattered. Some were made for powerful rulers, some for queens, some perhaps still unknown. Both valleys remained quiet for centuries. But back when the first tombs were being carved, the place was alive with work. Imagine it. The sun rising over the Nile, lighting the cliffs in gold. Hundreds of men walking through the dawn. They carry tools, chisels, hammers, jars of oil for lamps. They head toward the rock walls. Each group knows its task. Some dig, some draw, some paint, some bring food and water, some guard the site. Secrets must stay safe. Tombs were not built in days or weeks. They took years, sometimes decades, all for one man, one king, one god. The work had to be perfect. Every line, every shape, every colour. If something was wrong, it could ruin the king's journey after death. His soul might wander, lost. The valley was more than a place of stone. It was a promise, a contract between life and death. Each pharaoh wanted his tomb to outshine the last, deeper tunnels, brighter paintings, bigger chambers, but also better hidden. A tomb was a doorway, but also a vault. Inside were riches meant for the next world. But they had to survive this one. So tomb entrances were covered after the king was buried. Paths were cleared to erase footsteps. Sometimes false corridors were built to confuse thieves. The goal was simple. Let no one find it. Some tombs were never finished. A king died too soon, or plans changed. But the valley kept growing. New tunnels were carved beside old ones. The rock below became a maze, a city for the dead. But even the best secrets don't last forever. Over time, robbers found some tombs. They stole what they could. Others were lost to floods or rock slides. A few, like Tutankhamun's, remained almost untouched for thousands of years. Still, in those early days, the valley was a place of purpose, a sacred ground. A place chosen not just for what it looked like, but for what it meant. The mountain above, the silence below, the heat around it all. It was part of the design. To the people who built the tombs, this place was alive with meaning, a link between the world we walk and the world beyond. It is easy to see only sand and stone now, but once there were voices, footsteps, laughter. Music played during the burial rites, tears shed in torchlight, hope whispered into painted prayers. That is the valley's secret. It is not only a burial ground, it is a memory carved into the earth. When we look at it today, with cameras and maps and guides, we still feel its pull. The cliffs have not moved, the silence has not broken, and the mountain still stands above it all, shaped like a pyramid, shaped like a promise. In that shape, in that stillness, the kings sleep on. Chapter 2. Before the Pharaohs. Egypt's royal burial story before the Valley of the Kings, before hidden tombs and painted walls deep underground. Egypt's rulers were buried in the open. Their tombs were giant pyramids that reached toward the sky. They were built with strength, with pride, with stone upon stone stacked in perfect lines. Each pyramid was a message. It said, "Here lies a god, a king who ruled the living and now rules the dead." But there was a problem. Pyramids were not just symbols of power, they were also invitations. Everyone could see them. Everyone knew they held treasure. Gold, jewels, sacred statues, even food. These were gifts for the afterlife. But to robbers, they were treasure maps. They knew what was inside, and they wanted it. The first pyramids, built over 4,000 years ago, were meant to last forever. And in some ways they did. The Great Pyramid at Giza still stands. Its shape still rises over the desert. But the body of the king who once lay inside is long gone. His treasures gone, his coffin gone, his peace stolen. That was the lesson. The pharaohs after him learned it slowly. One tomb after another was robbed, not by enemies from far away, often by people from nearby, people who knew the land. People who may have helped build the tombs themselves, guards, labourers, priests. Sometimes the people paid to protect the tombs were the ones who opened them in secret. At first the Egyptians tried to stop the robbers with thicker walls, deeper chambers, hidden traps. But nothing worked forever. No matter how much they planned, someone always found a way in. And so the rulers of Egypt faced a choice. Would they keep building bigger pyramids? Would they keep placing their graves in open spaces where anyone could find them? Or would they change? That change came slowly, but it came. Around 1550 years before the birth of Christ, a new chapter in Egypt's story began. Historians call it the New Kingdom. The kings of this time were powerful. They had armies, they had wealth, they ruled over lands far beyond the Nile. They wanted their tombs to match their greatness, but they also wanted safety. They made a bold decision. No more pyramids, no more towering signs that pointed to a king's resting place. From now on, tombs would be hidden, dug deep into hills and cliffs, placed in dry, empty valleys. There would be no clues above ground, no statues, no stone roads, just rock, just silence, just space. This was not only about fear, it was also about belief. The Egyptians did not think death was the end. They believed life continued after death, but only if the body was protected, only if the soul was guided, only if the tomb stayed safe. To them, death was a journey. A king had to pass through dangers, monsters, darkness, fire. He needed maps, he needed magic, he needed things that would help him fight and win. That is why tombs were filled with treasures, but not only gold, also with words, with drawings, with painted spells that lit the walls. They were meant to help the king walk through the land of the dead, so he could be reborn with the sun. That belief shaped everything. It shaped how tombs looked. It shaped where tombs were built. It shaped what went inside. It was not enough to hide the tomb. The tomb had to tell a story. The walls became books. They showed the king sailing across the sky with gods. They showed him being judged, weighing his heart against truth, passing the test, becoming one with the sun god. Each tomb was a world of its own, a copy of heaven underground. The choice to move burials into secret tombs was more than smart, it was sacred. In this new system, the king's body could rest in peace. His soul could move through the afterlife. His name could live on. Some people today think these changes were just about safety. That may be true, but it was also about meaning. The old pyramids stood high, but they had become empty. The new tombs were hidden, but they were full of life, full of colour, full of hope. Take, for example, the tombs of Thutmose and Amenhotep. These kings ruled with strength. They knew the dangers. They saw what had happened to the pyramids of old, so they chose to be buried in rock, not in open sand. Their tombs were deep. They were guarded. They were carved with care. Their walls still speak. Even today, when archaeologists step inside, they find stories. They find prayers. They find the dreams of people long gone. That is the legacy of this change. Not just hidden tombs, not just clever plans, but a new way of thinking about death. It was no longer about building up, it was about going in. It was about guiding the soul, not just honouring the body. And it worked. Some tombs survived untouched for over 3,000 years. Most were robbed, yes. But even then their walls stayed, their drawings stayed, their meaning stayed. The story of Egypt's royal burials is not just a story of stone. It is a story of learning, of listening, of trying again. It shows how a civilization grew wiser. It shows how faith and fear shaped a valley of kings. It begins with the pyramids and ends in a hidden valley. But in between is the heart of Egypt, where life and death meet, where kings still sleep, and where even now we listen for their voices. Chapter 3. The First Royal Burials. The story of Egypt's secret valley begins with a single king. His name was Thutmose I. He ruled Egypt more than 3,400 years ago. He was a strong leader. He won battles, he built temples. He wanted his name to last forever. But most of all, he wanted his body to rest in peace after death. He had seen what happened to kings before him. Their pyramids had been robbed, their tombs broken into, their treasures stolen, their bodies disturbed. He wanted something different. He wanted to hide, so he made a bold choice. He chose to be buried in a place no one would expect, a place far from the cities, a place deep in the cliffs beyond the Nile, a dry valley with high rock walls and no signs of life, no grand entrance, no giant statue, just sand, just stone, just silence. That place would later be called the Valley of the Kings. But Thutmose I was the first to trust it with his soul. He gave his tomb builders a difficult task, to dig a grave deep into solid rock. No pyramid, no open chamber, just tunnels that would wind underground like the path of a river. They began with hammers, with copper chisels, with hands made strong by years of work. They chipped away at the cliff day by day, stone by stone, in the heat, in the dust, in the dark. There was no space for mistakes. One wrong turn could ruin the plan. One crack in the ceiling could bring everything down. They measured carefully. They carved slowly. They used lamps filled with oil to light their way. These builders were not ordinary workers. They were artists, engineers, storytellers. Many of them came from a special village not far from the valley. It was called Deir el-Medina. This village was home to the people who made the tombs for the kings. Fathers trained sons. Skills passed from hand to hand. They worked for the Pharaoh. They worked in secret. Their lives were simple, but their job was sacred. The tomb they made for Thutmose I was the first of its kind. It was not large, not yet. Later tombs would grow bigger, longer, more complex, but his was the beginning. It had a long hallway, a sharp turn. Then a chamber cut into the rock where his body would be placed. The walls were plain at first. Later kings would decorate theirs with bright colours and sacred texts. But this first tomb was focused on one thing: safety. Once the tomb was finished, the king's body was brought in, dressed in linen, placed in a coffin, surrounded by items he would need in the afterlife: food, jewellery, tools, symbols of power, symbols of protection. Then the tomb was sealed. The workers filled the entrance with rubble. They smoothed the cliffs. They left no trace, no sign. It was as if nothing was ever there. That was the plan, to hide the king so well that no thief would ever find him. But keeping a tomb secret was not easy. There were whispers, there were rumours. Even though the workers were loyal, not all secrets stayed safe. Still, the attempt to hide the tomb marked a turning point. Thutmose I had set a new path, a new tradition, and others followed. Tombs began to grow deeper. More rooms were added. Walls were painted with stories from sacred texts: the Book of the Dead, the Book of Gates, the Book of the Heavenly Cow. These were guides to help the soul travel through the dangers of the underworld. But it all began with that first hidden tomb, that first trust in the valley. The builders of Deir el-Medina became masters of their craft. They worked for years on a single tomb. They walked the same dusty paths each day. They shared meals, laughed, argued, dreamed. They knew they were building not just for a king, but for eternity. They were sworn to silence. They could not speak of what they saw. They could not tell where the tombs were. It was their duty. It was their burden. And yet, even with all the care, many tombs were found in later years. Some were robbed, some were forgotten, but a few stayed hidden. The tomb of Thutmose I was not untouched. In fact, his body was moved later by priests to protect it from robbers. It was placed with other royal mummies in a secret cache. But the valley he chose became a royal burial ground for centuries. More than 60 tombs were dug into its cliffs, for kings, for queens, for princes and nobles. Each tomb was a message of belief that death was not the end, that the soul would rise, that the king would rule again in the next world. Today the valley still holds that quiet, that power. Visitors walk its paths. They enter the cool chambers. They see the painted walls. They look at the stone and imagine the hands that shaped it. But it all began with Thutmose I, the king who chose to be buried in silence, the king who turned his back on pyramids and looked to the cliffs, the king who began the great story of the Valley of the Kings. Chapter 4. Masters of the Underground, the Tomb Builders. There is a small village hidden in the desert west of the Nile. The ground is dry, the houses are made of mud brick, the air is still. Today it lies in ruins, but long ago this place was full of life. It was called Deir el-Medina. This village was home to Egypt's most trusted workers. The men who built the tombs of kings, they were more than builders. They were artists. They were engineers. They were men of great skill. They were chosen to dig the secret homes of the dead, homes for pharaohs, for queens, for princes. Not everyone could live in this village. Only a small group was allowed. They had to be loyal, careful, quiet. They had to know how to keep secrets. Their work was sacred. Their work had to last forever. Each man had a job. Some carved tunnels through the rock, some painted walls with gods and magic spells, some wrote prayers in neat lines of hieroglyphs. Others mixed paint or carried supplies. Each person had a part to play. They woke with the sun. They walked through the valley to the tombs. Their path was narrow and rough, but they walked it every day. The sun burned their backs. The wind carried dust into their clothes. Still, they kept walking. When they reached the tomb, they began to work. It was quiet inside the rock, only the sound of chisels, tap, 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 hour after hour. The stone was hard, the air was hot. They worked by the light of small oil lamps. The smoke stung their eyes, but they kept working. To carve through stone they used simple tools, bronze chisels, wooden mallets, stone hammers. They measured by hand. They marked lines with red paint. Their cuts had to be clean. Their shapes had to be right. Even the smallest mistake could ruin everything. After the tunnels were carved, the artists came in. They painted the walls with scenes of the afterlife. Bright colours made from ground stones and minerals, yellow from ochre, blue from crushed lapis, green from malachite. The colours still shine today. They painted gods with animal heads, stars in dark blue skies, the sun god riding a boat through the underworld. They painted the king speaking to Osiris, passing the test of truth, being born again. These pictures were more than decoration. They were prayers, spells, guides for the soul. The king needed them to reach the next life. So the artists took great care. Every line had meaning, every colour had power. At the end of each day the workers returned to their village. There they rested. They ate with their families, bread, lentils. On special days, maybe fish or meat. They drank beer made from barley. They told stories. They taught their sons. The village was full of children. Many of them would grow up to join the work. Skills passed from father to son. Secrets passed from mouth to ear. Some families worked in tombs for many generations. It was their life, their pride. Deir el-Medina was not large, only a few dozen houses. A small well, a chapel, a wall to keep out strangers. It was a quiet place, but it was also full of learning. Many workers could read and write. They left behind letters and lists, notes on stone and pots. These speak to us now. They tell us what life was like. They speak of birthdays, illness, rain, love, anger, and they speak of something surprising, the first known labour strike in history. One year during the reign of Ramses III, the workers stopped working. Their pay was late. They were hungry. They had waited for days. They were promised bread and oil. It never came, so they walked out. They did not scream. They did not fight. They simply sat down outside the tomb. They refused to go in. They left messages for the officials. They asked for justice, for fair treatment. Their voices were heard. The food arrived. Work continued. The tomb was finished. This strike is written in history, not in song, but in real records, names and dates, words scratched in ink. It shows us that these men were not just tools. They were people with hopes, with needs, with strength. Their job was hard, but it was filled with meaning. They knew their work would last beyond their own lives. They knew they were building something sacred, something for the ages. Today, when we step into a tomb in the Valley of the Kings, we see their hands, in the smooth stone, in the bright paint, in the prayers that still whisper from the walls. But their story began in that small village, a place of dust and fire, a place where art met faith, a place where men carved eternity into rock. Chapter 5. Art that lives forever decorating the tombs. Deep under the cliffs of the Valley of the Kings, in the still darkness, something waits. It is not gold, it is not jewels, it is not even the mummies of kings. It is art, bright, bold, alive, painted on walls of stone thousands of years ago. These paintings do not fade, they do not whisper, they speak in full voice. They tell stories of gods and journeys beyond death. They show the dreams of a people who believed that life did not end at the grave. For them, death was only the beginning. Inside these tombs, the walls come alive. Each painting is a spell. Each line of colour is a prayer. Every figure, every shape, every stroke of the brush was placed with meaning. The artists who painted these tombs were not just painters. They were storytellers, priests, magicians. They used pictures and words to build a world for the dead. The work they did was sacred. Each tomb belonged to a pharaoh, a man who was believed to be part god. His tomb had to be perfect. It had to help him pass safely through the underworld. It had to guide him through the dangers that waited after death. So the walls became maps, not maps of the earth, but maps of the next world. They were filled with scenes from sacred books. One of the most famous was the Book of the Dead. This was not a single book. It was a collection of spells, prayers, and instructions. Its purpose was simple: to help the soul survive the afterlife. The artists painted these texts in pictures and words. They showed the king standing before the gods. They showed his heart being weighed on a scale. They showed him sailing across the sky in a boat with the sun god. They showed him being born again. Nothing was painted just to look pretty. Every image had a purpose, a meaning, a job. A crocodile-headed god might guard a gate. A serpent might wait in the shadows. A figure with the head of a falcon might lead the king forward. Each god had a name. Each name had power. To name a god was to call on its help. The writing on the walls was in hieroglyphs. This was the sacred script of ancient Egypt. It used pictures instead of letters. A bird might stand for the letter A. A ripple of water might mean the sound N. But hieroglyphs were more than sounds. They were symbols. Each one held layers of meaning. To read them was to open the door to a deeper world. The artists did not carve the walls first. They began by planning. They drew guidelines in red ink, then they added the drawings, then the words. When it was perfect, they carved the lines into the rock. Then came the colour. The colours they used were made by hand. There were no paint shops, no stores. The artists crushed stones and minerals. They mixed them with water or plant gum. They used brushes made from reeds. They used red made from iron-rich earth, yellow from clay, white from chalk, black from soot, blue from lapis lazuli, a deep stone brought from far away, green from ground malachite. These colours still glow on the walls today, even after more than 3,000 years. The reason is the dry desert air. It kept the paint safe, but also the skill of the artists. They knew how to make it last. They understood the rock, the tools, the light. The colours were not just for beauty, they were chosen for meaning. Red was for power and life. Yellow was for the sun and the skin of the gods. Green was for rebirth and new life. Blue was for the sky and the waters of creation. Black was for the rich soil of the Nile and for death that leads to life. Each colour helped tell the story. Each line helped the king on his journey. Sometimes we find scenes repeated in many tombs: the weighing of the heart, the sunboat, the journey through night and day. But no two tombs are the same. Each one was made for one man, one soul. Each had his name written again and again, because to write a name was to give it life. If a name was forgotten, a soul could be lost forever. So the name was painted large, strong, sacred, and beside it the stories continued. In the tomb of Seti I, the walls stretch far, the colours are deep, the figures full of life. In the tomb of Rameses VI, we see the Book of the Earth. It shows the sun god moving through darkness, bringing light. In the tomb of Tutankhamun, though smaller, the colours remain rich. Yellow wraps the walls in warmth. Black outlines the path to eternity. Each tomb is a temple of colour, a book written in light. The artists who made these were trained from youth. They learned to copy old texts. They studied the gods. They practiced again and again. They worked as teams. Some drew, some carved, some painted. They knew each other well. They lived near the valley. They walked its paths each day. Their work was done in silence, in heat, in darkness. But it was filled with purpose. They were building not just tombs, but bridges to the afterlife. They believed what they painted. They believed that every stroke mattered, that every god they drew would stand guard, that every spell would protect. This is why we still feel their work today. We walk into a tomb and the air is still, but the walls move. The gods watch us. The colours glow, the names whisper. The tomb is not empty. It is full of hope. It is full of faith. It is full of the hands and hearts of the men who made it. Art that was never meant to be seen again. Art made only for the soul of a king. Yet now we see it, we stand before it, we feel its truth. It has lasted. Because it was made with love, with care, with deep belief. It is art that lives forever. Chapter 6. The greatest pharaohs and their eternal homes in the heart of the desert, behind walls of stone and silence, the greatest rulers of ancient Egypt prepared for forever. They were not planning for a short sleep, they were planning for eternity. These kings and queens believed death was not the end. It was the next step in a long journey. Their tombs were not just graves, they were homes. Sacred places, full of meaning, full of dreams, and each ruler wanted their home to be greater than the last. One of the most famous pharaohs was Rameses II. People called him Rameses the Great. He ruled for 66 years. Longer than almost any king, before or after. He led armies, he built cities, he had over 100 children, he filled the land with statues of himself. But even with all his power, he knew he had to prepare for the afterlife. His tomb in the Valley of the Kings was made for a god-king. But it was not just for him. It was for many of his sons too. His tomb was large and deep, carved far into the rock, filled with sacred texts and paintings that stretched across the walls and ceilings. The scenes inside show him meeting gods, speaking with Osiris, the god of the dead, riding with the sun god through the sky. The tomb is a guidebook, a doorway, a safe path through the dark. But Ramesses was not the only ruler to build with greatness. Before him came a woman who changed everything. Her name was Hatshepsut. She was born a princess, but she became a pharaoh. In a world led by men, she wore the royal beard. She took the full titles of king. She ruled with wisdom and strength. Her reign was peaceful. Her people built great things. Her tomb in the valley was one of the most beautiful ever made. The design was careful, graceful. Her temple at Deir el-Bahari stood like a staircase to heaven. And her tomb was deep in the rock. It was quiet, full of light and space. The paintings showed her not only as a queen, but as a god. She showed the world that power had no gender. Not long after Hatshepsut, another great king rose. His name was Amenhotep III. His rule brought wealth and beauty to Egypt. It was the Golden Age. Art, music and building flourished. He built grand temples. He filled his palaces with fine things. And he planned a tomb to match his greatness. Amenhotep chose a place deep in the western valley. His tomb was large, carefully made. The rooms spread out like the wings of a bird. In every part he showed his power and peace. His tomb was not only a place for his body, it was a statement, a reflection of a time when Egypt stood tall. The paintings were elegant. The stone was smooth. Every symbol was rich with meaning. And then there was Seti I, the father of Ramesses the Great. He did not rule as long as his son, but he gave Egypt one of the finest tombs ever built. His tomb is the longest in the valley, over 100 meters, and it goes deep, down many stairways, through halls filled with carved figures and gods, through rooms where the sky is painted on the ceiling and the stars look down. Seti's tomb was carved with care and love. The work was done by hand. Every picture tells part of the journey. Every line was placed with meaning. The gods are shown clearly, their hands reaching out, their eyes watching over the king. Even today his tomb feels alive, as if it still waits for his return. But behind all this beauty and power, something else was happening. A quiet race. Each pharaoh wanted his tomb to be more than the one before, bigger, deeper, more colourful, more perfect. It was not just pride, it was belief. They thought the afterlife was long and full of danger. A better tomb meant a safer journey. A better tomb meant a better rebirth. So the builders were pushed. The artists were challenged. The workers carved day and night. They created new shapes, new ideas. They added more spells, more scenes, more rooms. They were building dreams into stone. Sometimes they ran out of time. When a king died young, the tomb had to be finished fast. Some were left incomplete. Some were rushed. Others were hidden even more deeply to keep them safe. But the dream never stopped. Tombs were more than resting places. They were mirrors. They showed the face of the king. They showed what he believed, what he feared, what he hoped. Together, these tombs form a silent story. Ramesses with his army of sons, Hatshepsut breaking all rules, Amenhotep wrapped in wealth, Seti surrounded by stars. Each left a message, each shaped the valley, and together they made the Valley of the Kings more than a graveyard. They made it a kingdom of the dead, a city of memory, a place where stone still speaks, where paint still shines, where names still live. Because in Egypt, to remember a name is to keep the soul alive. That is why they built so carefully. That is why they painted so boldly. They wanted to be remembered. They wanted to rise again with the sun, and in many ways they have. Chapter 7. Treasures Beyond Imagination. In the silence of the Valley of the Kings, behind doors sealed for thousands of years, treasures slept in the dark. Not just gold, not only jewels, but memories, stories, lives. The tombs were not empty halls of stone. They were full of things the dead would need, full of beauty and power, full of hope. Every item placed beside the body had a purpose. The most eye-catching things were made of gold. Gold was not just wealth. Gold was the skin of the gods. It did not rust, it did not fade, it caught the light and held it forever. It was perfect for eternity. Pharaohs were buried with golden jewelry, necklaces thick with beads, bracelets shaped like snakes, rings with carved names. Each piece carried magic. Each was placed with care. There were golden weapons, dagger blades with handles of carved crystal, arrows tipped with shining bronze, shields of wood and leather wrapped in thin gold. These were not for battle, they were symbols, tools for the next world, for protection, for power. Some tombs held golden beds with legs shaped like lions. Others had golden thrones, painted with stories of the king's rule, symbols of authority, symbols of the life they had lived and the life they hoped to live again. But the tombs did not hold only royal things. They held everyday things too. They held clothing, linen robes carefully folded, sandals made from palm leaves, belts and headbands, even wigs made from real hair. Pharaohs wanted to be dressed well even after death. They held food, baskets of grain, dried dates, figs, bread, meat sealed in clay jars, jars of honey, jars of wine, enough for many lifetimes. Nothing was left to chance. There were games, boards with tiny carved pieces, things to pass the time in the afterlife. There were razors, combs, perfume jars, mirrors, even writing tools, brushes, ink palettes, papyrus scrolls. These were not for show, they were for use, because to the Egyptians the afterlife was not a place of rest. It was a place of living, a real world, a mirror of this one. They believed the dead would walk, eat, speak and rule again, but even more important than food or clothing were the sacred objects. These were the tools of the spirit. There were amulets, small magical charms shaped like gods or animals. Each had a job. Some gave strength, others brought protection. Some helped the soul speak, others helped it stay silent when needed. One common amulet was the Eye of Horus. It brought healing and safety. Another was the scarab beetle. It gave rebirth and courage. These amulets were placed on the body, sewn into the wrappings, tied around the neck, tucked between the fingers. Then there were the canopic jars. These jars held the organs of the dead. The stomach, the liver, the lungs, the intestines. Each organ was cleaned and wrapped, each placed in its own jar. Each jar was protected by a different god. The jars had lids shaped like heads, a human, a baboon, a falcon, a jackal. They stood guard. Beside them were statues, small ones and large ones, carved from wood, stone or gold, gods in their true forms, or servants called shabtis. These were tiny workers who would help the king in the next life. If he needed to farm, they would farm. If he needed to build, they would build. They were made to obey. The tomb also held royal regalia, crowns, sceptres, staffs. Each piece showed power. Each showed the king's right to rule. Even in death he was still king, still divine. The crown was not just a hat, it was a mark of the gods. The sceptre was not just a stick, it was a weapon of order. It told chaos to stay away. All these treasures were placed with care, some by priests, some by family, some by workers who had spent years building the tomb. Every item had a place, every place had meaning, and then the doors were closed and the silence began. What saved these treasures is not just stone or secrecy. It was the desert, the dry air, the lack of rain, the deep stillness of the valley. In most parts of the world, cloth falls apart, wood rots, food vanishes, paint fades. But here things stay. Linen stays soft. Bread turns hard but still keeps its shape. Paint shines as if fresh. Even scents stay trapped inside sealed jars. Time moved on, dynasties fell, new kings came, but some tombs stayed safe, not all. Many were robbed, stripped, burned, but some were not. The best known is the tomb of Tutankhamun. When Howard Carter found it in 1922, it was nearly untouched. He opened a door and saw golden chariots, painted beds, lockboxes, jewellery, sandals, a fan made with ostrich feathers, food jars, musical instruments, toys, and the famous mask of gold and blue that covered the face of the boy king. Over 5,000 items were found inside. Every one of them had a purpose. Every one of them was a piece of the puzzle, and all of it had waited in the dark for over 3,000 years. Tutankhamun was not the most powerful king, not the richest, not the most loved. But because his tomb survived, he became the most famous. His treasure told a story, not just his story, but Egypt's story. A story of faith, a story of art, a story of love. Because to bury someone with care is an act of love, to wrap a body in linen, to place food beside it, to leave behind favourite things, to paint prayers on the walls. It is all love, and it is also belief. The ancient Egyptians believed the soul lived on. They believed it needed help, so they gave everything they had. And now, when we look at those treasures, we see more than gold. We see the people who placed them. We see the hands that carved. We see the hearts that hoped. They gave their kings more than wealth. They gave them eternity. Chapter 8. Ancient Tomb Robbers and Early Treasure Hunters. In the deep silence of the Valley of the Kings, long after the last stone was sealed and the last prayer was whispered, someone else came. Not with reverence, not with love, but with hunger. Tomb robbers, they came in the night, or sometimes during the day. They were fast, clever, ruthless, and they were not new. Robbery did not wait for centuries. It began early. Some tombs were broken into only a few years after the burial, sometimes even during the lifetime of the next king. The treasures buried with the dead were too great to ignore. Gold, jewels, spices, oil, fine linen, tools, weapons, wine. These were not just symbols of the afterlife. They were riches that tempted the living. Robbers knew where to look. Many had worked on the tombs themselves. They had carved the walls, painted the gods, carried the tools. They knew the turns in the tunnels. They knew how the doors closed, where the body lay, where the treasure sat waiting. Some robberies were inside jobs. Men who once built the tombs came back to empty them. Others were guards who were paid to protect the dead, but instead sold their secrets. Even priests, once trusted with rituals, were sometimes accused of betrayal. There was much to gain. A single ring of gold could feed a family for weeks. A carved amulet could be sold in the market. A jar of oil or wine could be passed off as trade. These objects, sacred to the soul of the dead, were stripped and scattered. But the ancient Egyptians did not take robbery lightly. They had laws, they had patrols, they had police. There were guards stationed in the valley, men sent by the state to protect the tombs. These guards watched paths, checked the rock for signs of movement, kept scrolls to record what they saw. When a tomb was robbed, there was an investigation. Sometimes it was too late. The tomb was empty, the doors broken, the mummy pulled from its coffin, gold cut away, linens burned. But sometimes the robbers were caught. We know this because of the records, ancient papyrus scrolls, written in the careful hand of court scribes, found hidden in temples and tombs, preserved by the dry air. These documents tell of real trials, real men, real confessions. One famous set of records is called the Abbot Papyrus. It dates to around 1100 years before the birth of Christ. It tells the story of a tomb inspection. A group of officials was sent to check if royal tombs had been broken into. They found many were safe, but not all. One tomb belonged to a queen. When the inspectors arrived, they found it open, the walls damaged, the mummy gone, the items stolen. The report was written in formal language, but the shock is clear. Another record, the Leopold Amherst Papyrus, is even more vivid. It describes the trial of a gang of tomb robbers. They had broken into the tomb of a noble. They took gold, linen, even the inner wrappings of the mummy. They stripped the body and left it bare. The men were caught, brought before judges, beaten, questioned. Some confessed. They told who helped them, who sold the goods, who looked the other way. The punishment was harsh. In some cases, death. In others, beatings or exile. Tomb robbery was seen as a crime not only against the state, but against the gods. To disturb the dead was to disturb the balance of the world. Still, the robberies continued. No matter how deep the tombs, no matter how well hidden, many were found, broken open, their treasures lost. And yet not all. Some tombs stayed hidden for thousands of years. They were missed by chance, covered by floods, buried by rockfall, forgotten as the world changed. One such tomb was that of Tutankhamun. When Howard Carter found it in 1922, it was nearly intact. The outer seal had been broken. Thieves had entered once or twice. They had taken oils and small items, but most of the treasure remained. Over 5,000 items lay untouched. The golden mask, the chariots, the clothes, the food, even the king himself. It was a miracle, a message from the past. Tutankhamun was not a great king. He died young. He ruled for less than a decade. But his tomb survived, and through it we learned what had been lost. We saw what a royal burial was meant to be, a place of light and colour, a home for the soul. Not all tombs were so lucky. The tomb of Rameses II was found empty. His body had been moved, his treasure gone. Only the carvings on the wall remained. The same was true for Seti I, for Amenhotep III, for Hatshepsut. Their tombs were carved with love, their stories told in paint and stone, but the goods they had taken to the afterlife were taken from them. Even the bodies of the kings were not safe. Many were hidden by priests during a time of great trouble. They were taken from their tombs, rewrapped, placed in secret caches, grouped with other mummies. This was not robbery, it was rescue. One such cache was found in Deir el-Bahari, a hidden tomb filled with the remains of more than 50 royals, including Rameses II, each one wrapped, labelled, saved. It was a quiet act of loyalty in a time when loyalty was rare. The story of tomb robbery is not a tale of villains alone. It is a story of temptation, of weakness, of fear, but also of effort, of protection, of justice. It reminds us that even in the most sacred places, human desire can creep in. It reminds us that treasure can be both a gift and a curse. But it also shows us something more. Despite all the losses, despite the broken doors and stripped walls, the heart of the tombs remains. The paintings, the prayers, the names, they still speak, they still shine, and through them the dead are still remembered, which to the ancient Egyptians was everything. Chapter 9, Napoleon and the Birth of Egyptology. In the summer of 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte sailed to Egypt. He brought more than soldiers. He brought scholars, historians, artists, scientists, engineers, mathematicians, almost 200 of them. Their goal was not war. Their goal was knowledge. As the army moved through Egypt, these men observed. They measured temples. They sketched statues, they wrote about what they saw. They were amazed. Many had never seen ruins like these before. Columns carved with strange signs, giant stone heads half buried in sand, temples rising from the desert like forgotten dreams. These men collected all of it in a book. It was called Description de l'Égypte. It was massive, published in parts, full of drawings and notes, full of careful study. For many people in Europe, this was the first time they had ever seen Egyptian wonders. The book lit a spark. Europe became obsessed with ancient Egypt, with its strange writing, its pyramids, its gods, its kings. Soon came the explorers. Some were scholars, others were adventurers. Many were both. One of the most famous was Giovanni Belzoni. He had once been a circus strongman. He was tall, strong, bold. He came to Egypt looking for a new life. He became one of the first men to enter the tomb of Seti I. He discovered statues, moved obelisks, found hidden chambers. He left his name carved on walls, so did many others. They came to the Valley of the Kings with candles and hammers. They took what they could: statues, paintings, coffins, even mummies. These were shipped to museums, to private collections, to kings and queens. Egyptian treasures began to fill the rooms of Europe. The British Museum, the Louvre, places of learning, places of power. It was a time of treasure hunting. There were few rules, few protections. The goal was to find, to collect, to own. But not everyone agreed. Some began to ask questions. What if these things were more than just treasure? What if they were part of a story? What if they could teach us something? Slowly the attitude began to change. People started to dig more carefully, to record what they found, to study the meaning behind the objects. Archaeology was born. It was not perfect. Mistakes were made. But the shift had begun. The focus moved from gold to knowledge, from taking to learning. It started with Napoleon's scholars, with their pencils and notebooks. It grew with explorers like Belzoni, and it changed with the rise of science. Today we still feel that change when we walk through a museum, when we read about ancient Egypt, when we look at a carved stone and ask not just what it is, but who made it and why. That is the legacy, a journey from curiosity to respect. A journey that began in 1798 when Napoleon stepped onto the sand and opened the world's eyes. Chapter 10. Howard Carter, the man who found King Tut. In the quiet sands of the Valley of the Kings, one man changed history. His name was Howard Carter. He was not born rich, he was not born famous, but he had a sharp eye and steady hands, and he had something more. He had patience. Howard Carter began as an artist. When he was just a teenager, he travelled from England to Egypt. He was hired to copy the paintings found on the walls of tombs. His drawings were clear and full of detail. He worked carefully. He watched closely. He listened. Through drawing he learned. He studied the ancient gods. He learned how tombs were built, how pharaohs were buried, how the stories of the dead were written on the stone. He fell in love with Egypt. Soon he became more than an artist. He began to dig. He learned how to uncover the past, not with force, but with care. He became known as a hard worker. He was not always easy to work with. He spoke his mind. He argued when he thought he was right. But he worked with honesty. He did not chase treasure. He chased answers. Then, one day, someone believed in him. Lord Carnarvon was a wealthy English earl. He had money, he had interest in Egypt, but he did not know how to search, so he hired Carter. He gave him a job, and more than that, he gave him a chance. Carter had one goal. He wanted to find the tomb of a young king named Tutankhamun. At that time, most people thought all the tombs in the valley had already been found. The valley had been searched for more than a century. Many thought Carter was wasting time, but he believed. He believed the tomb was still there, hidden, waiting. So he searched. Year after year he dug. Each season he cleared more rubble, moved more stone, looked under walls, followed small clues. He found broken pots, bits of gold foil, hints, just hints. But no tomb. Lord Carnarvon began to worry. He had spent a lot of money. He asked Carter if they should stop. Carter begged for one more season, one last chance. He returned to a place near the tomb of Ramesses VI. It was a spot he had searched before, but this time he went deeper. In November 1922, a young water boy working at the site stumbled on a step, a stone step. Carter ordered the area to be cleared. More steps appeared, then a door, sealed with royal markings. He sent a telegram to Lord Carnarvon. The rest is history. Together they opened the tomb. Inside was a narrow passage filled with debris. Behind it was a sealed doorway, and beyond that the first glimpse of gold. Carter had done it. He had found the untouched tomb of a pharaoh. It had been hidden for over 3,000 years. Inside were chariots, thrones, beds, statues, boxes, clothes, food, and at the heart of it all the coffin of Tutankhamun. Carter did not rush. He spent 10 years studying every item, drawing, photographing, writing notes. Piece by piece he recorded everything. He treated the tomb not as treasure but as a story, because that is what it was. Carter was not perfect. He was stubborn. He did not always follow rules. He clashed with officials. He made enemies, but he also had something rare. He had vision. He had patience. He had respect. He saw the tomb as a message from the past. He gave the world not just gold, but knowledge. Thanks to him, we know how a young king was buried. We know how ancient Egyptians lived and believed. We know what they carried into death. Howard Carter gave the world a doorway to the past, and he stepped through it with care. Chapter 11, November 4th, 1922. The discovery that changed everything. The morning of November 4th, 1922, began like many others in the Valley of the Kings. The sun was bright. The sand was warm. The team was tired. They had been digging for years and found little. The air was full of dust and quiet frustration. Howard Carter stood watching his workers. He had returned to a place he had searched before, a spot near the tomb of Ramesses VI. He had a feeling, just a feeling that something might still lie hidden beneath the rubble. Then something unexpected happened. A young Egyptian boy named Hussein was helping the team. He was not an archaeologist. He was not a trained digger. He was bringing water to the men as he did every day. That was his job. But on this day, while moving through the dirt and stones, his foot struck something hard, something flat, something man-made. He brushed away the dust. He saw a carved edge, a step. He called to the others. Soon the whole team gathered. Carter rushed over. He got down on his knees. With his own hands he cleared more sand. Another step appeared, then another. They were stone steps leading downward. They were cut into the rock, covered for centuries, hidden beneath debris. The team worked carefully. Hour by hour they brushed and dug. They uncovered more steps. By the end of the day, 16 steps led down into the ground. At the bottom was a doorway. It was sealed with mud bricks. The bricks held a stamp. It was a name, Tutankhamun. Howard Carter froze. He could barely speak. The name was clear, a royal seal, a sign no one had seen in this valley before. He did not open the door, not yet. He had waited too long to rush. Instead, he sent a telegram to Lord Carnarvon. He wrote only a few words. At the moment have made wonderful discovery. Stop. Greatest importance. Stop. Await your arrival. Stop. Lord Carnarvon was in England. The journey to Egypt would take days. Carter had no choice but to wait. Each day was long. Each hour moved like stone. He guarded the site with care. He watched the entrance. He spoke little. He checked the seals again and again. He had found something, but he did not yet know what. After what felt like forever, Carnarvon arrived in Luxor. His daughter, Lady Evelyn, was with him. Together they rode to the valley. The three of them stood at the steps. The sun was rising. The valley was quiet. Carter gave the order. They began to open the door, slowly, carefully, stone by stone. Behind it was a corridor filled with rubble, packed tight with broken rock. The team started clearing the passage, one bucket at a time. They worked in silence. They felt the weight of time all around them. At the end of the corridor, another door appeared. This one was different. It was sealed too, but not broken. The seal was still whole. Tutankhamun. Carter knew what that meant. No one had entered. For more than 3,000 years this tomb had waited, untouched, unseen. He held a small chisel. He made a hole. He held a candle. He reached through the hole. The flame flickered. The air was still. He looked in. Lord Carnarvon asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter answered with words that would become legend. "Yes, wonderful things." Behind that door lay one of the greatest discoveries in the history of archaeology. But on that first day, it was not about the gold. It was not about the mask. It was about the moment a boy kicked the dirt, the moment a man followed his instinct, the moment history stood still. That November morning began like any other, but it ended with the world holding its breath. Because on that day, in a valley of stone, the past finally opened its eyes. Chapter 12. Wonderful Things. Inside Tutankhamun's tomb. Howard Carter had waited a lifetime for this moment, the moment when a chisel met ancient stone, when his candle flickered against the still air inside a sealed tomb. He had cleared the steps. He had found the sealed doorway. He had waited for Lord Carnarvon to arrive, and now, in the cool, breathless silence of the Valley of the Kings, he stood in front of a hole no wider than a hand. He reached through. He held the candle steady. The flame danced, and then he saw it, a strange glow of gold everywhere. Shapes piled high in the shadows, carved wooden beds, statues of gods, large black guardians standing watch, golden chariots, furniture stacked like a storeroom, objects untouched by time. Carnarvon stood behind him, unable to see. He asked, "Do you see anything?" Carter paused. His voice was quiet, almost broken by emotion. "Yes, wonderful things." That was the beginning. The first room they entered was later named the antechamber. It was not large, but it was packed from floor to ceiling. 3 golden chariots leaned against the wall. Not toys, real chariots used for ceremony or war. Some had painted scenes. Others were inlaid with ivory. One still had the dust of time on its wheel. There were beds with animal heads carved into the wood, lions, hippos, sacred beasts. Some had gold leaf still clinging to the surface. There were boxes made of cedar and ebony, sealed shut. What they held was still a mystery. A throne, once touched by a king, stood tall. On its back was a scene, the young Pharaoh seated while his queen rubbed oil on his shoulders. Their feet touched. A quiet moment frozen in gold. Statues stood along the wall. Some were black, some gold. Some held staffs and ankhs. Some wore the crown of Upper Egypt, some the crown of Lower Egypt. Their eyes stared out through the ages. The room had no order. It looked as if everything had been rushed inside, perhaps to hide it, perhaps because the king had died suddenly. Nothing was labelled, nothing was explained. Carter faced a problem. Everything needed to be recorded. Nothing could be moved without being studied first. So he made a decision. He would not rush. He brought in a camera. He hired Harry Burton, a skilled photographer. Burton worked in the heat and dark. He used long exposures. He captured every angle, every shadow. They drew diagrams, numbered every object, opened every box carefully, wrote notes by hand. Each day brought new discoveries. Each item told a new story. There were walking sticks, over 100 of them. Tutankhamun had used them often. His bones showed that he had a club foot. He may have limped. He may have been in pain. There were sandals made of gold. One pair had images of enemies on the soles, so the king would step on them with every stride. In one corner of the antechamber stood 2 tall statues. They wore short kilts and royal crowns. They held staffs and stared forward. Their skin was painted black. Their purpose was clear. They were guardians. Behind them was a sealed wall, the burial chamber. But Carter did not open it yet. First, he studied the rest. He moved slowly. Off the antechamber was another room, smaller, darker. It became known as the annex. This room was cramped. Things were piled without care. Many had fallen over. Jars had broken. There were clay vessels that once held wine. Others held oils. Some were labelled with dates, some with the name of the vineyard. There were baskets of fruit, dried figs, dates, loaves of bread. There were boxes filled with meat wrapped in linen. There were board games, knives, linen robes, paint jars, personal things, everyday things. The room felt human. It reminded Carter that this was not just a tomb, it was a home, a place prepared for a soul to live again. Tutankhamun had been buried not just as a king, but as a young man. He had his comforts, his tools, his favourite things. News of the discovery spread slowly at first, then it raced across the world. Newspapers printed the story. Headlines shouted from every corner, "The boy king found, gold in the desert, secrets of Egypt revealed." Reporters arrived in Egypt. Cameras followed every step. Writers described the heat, the light, the dust. People stood in line to see photographs, to hear lectures, to read books. Tutankhamun became a name known by all. Carter became famous. Though he stayed quiet, he avoided attention, he focused on the work. The world had never seen a royal tomb so intact. It took Carter 10 years to clear and study the tomb. 10 years of care, 10 years of writing, 10 years of walking between the walls of gold. He treated every object as sacred, not because of its beauty, but because of what it meant. It was a window, a message, a whisper from the past. Tutankhamun had been forgotten for centuries, but now, through Carter, he had returned, not as a ghost, but as a story, a boy who wore the crown, a king who died too young, a soul sent into the next world with all he might need. Chapter 13. The Burial Chamber, face to face with a pharaoh. The room stood silent behind the sealed wall. It had waited untouched for more than 3,000 years. Behind that wall lay the reason Howard Carter had come to the valley. Not for the gold, not for the painted chariots or the jewelled rings. He had come for the king, the boy pharaoh Tutankhamun. Now the time had come to meet him. For months Carter and his team had studied every corner of the outer rooms, the antechamber, the annex, the treasures, the tools, the tiny details of everyday life. But one chamber had remained closed. It was the burial chamber. Behind the black statues of the godly guardians stood the final doorway, still sealed, still marked with the royal name. The seal was made of clay, soft when pressed long ago, now hardened by centuries. On it was the sign of the jackal, the god of the dead. Breaking that seal was like opening a prayer. Carter and his team worked slowly. They chipped away at the bricks. Dust floated in the air. Light from their lamps flickered on the ancient wall. As the door came down, it revealed a golden glow inside. The room was lined with golden walls covered in sacred texts, prayers for protection, spells to guide the soul, words written for a god in human form. In the middle of the room stood a towering structure, not one box, but four, one inside the other, each made of wood, each covered in gold. These were the shrines. The shrines stood one inside the next like giant nesting dolls. They filled almost the entire space. There was hardly room to move between them and the chamber walls. The outer shrine was huge, covered in deep carvings, covered in protective prayers. On its doors were seals that had not been broken. Carter studied them in silence. No one had been here since the day the king was buried. To reach the body, the team would have to open each layer. It took time. Weeks passed. With each shrine removed, Carter found another inside, each smaller, each closer to the king. Inside the final shrine was something that caught the breath of everyone in the room. A stone box. The sarcophagus, carved with images of winged goddesses. Their arms stretched to protect, their faces filled with calm. The lid was heavy, made of quartzite. It had taken strong men to lift it into place. Now modern hands would lift it again. Under the lid was the first coffin. It was shaped like a man. It glowed with gold leaf and inlay. It showed the king with his arms crossed, holding the crook and flail, the signs of power. His eyes stared straight ahead. His lips were still. That was not the end. Inside this coffin was another. It too was shaped like the king. And inside that one more, the final coffin, the third. It was different. It was made of solid gold, not gold leaf, not wood with paint. Pure gold, heavy, bright, warm in the light of the lamps. The face on this coffin was calm, young, strong, the eyes outlined in black, the lips full. This was the image the world would remember, but there was one more step. Carter and his team had to open this last coffin. They did so with care. Inside, wrapped in layers of fine linen, was the body of the king, Tutankhamun, the boy who had worn the double crown, the child who had ruled one of the greatest empires on earth. Now, more than 3,000 years later, his body lay still. The wrappings were dark and brittle. The air had dried them like parchment. The gold mask covered his face, the mask that would become the symbol of Egypt. It was made with skill and love, gold and blue glass, lapis lazuli for the eyebrows, quartz for the eyes. The cobra and vulture on the forehead stood for protection, for kingship, for the gods of the land. The mask had been made to show the king as a god, beautiful, perfect, eternal, but beneath the mask was a real person. Carter knew he had to go further. He had to examine the body. He removed the mask. He unwrapped the linens, layer by layer. What he found surprised him. The body was damaged, burned slightly by the oils used during burial. The bones were thin, the teeth small, the feet malformed. This was not a powerful warrior. This was a boy who had been buried like a god, a boy who had been mourned with riches, a boy who had been remembered in silence for centuries. The team studied the body with great care. They took notes. They made drawings. Later, with modern tools, scientists would confirm what Carter had guessed. The king had died young, maybe from illness, maybe from accident. His bones told stories of pain, of weakness. But his tomb told a story of honor. He had not been forgotten. He had been wrapped in gold. He had been guarded by gods. He had been sent into the afterlife with every gift a king could need. And now, after more than 3,000 years, the world saw his face again, not in shadow, but in light. Carter stood quietly in that chamber. He did not speak much. He knew what he had done. He had opened a door not just to a tomb, but to a lost world. He had come face to face with a pharaoh, and the world had followed. Chapter 14. Modern Archaeology. Science meets ancient secrets. Today, archaeology looks very different from the days of Howard Carter. The brush is still there, the care is still there. But now science stands beside the spade. The past is still buried in Egypt, still waiting. But the way we find it has changed. In the early days, discovery came by eye and hand, digging, guessing, hoping. Now archaeologists use tools that look inside the earth without lifting a single rock. CT scans can look inside a mummy without opening its wrappings. They show bones, teeth, injuries, sometimes even illness. We now know that Tutankhamun had a clubfoot. We know he had malaria. That knowledge came not from cutting, but from scanning. DNA tests tell us about family, who was the father, who was the mother. We now know Tutankhamun was the son of Akhenaten. We know his parents were closely related. This tells us about royal life and how power moved through bloodlines. Chemistry helps too. Scientists take tiny samples from paint and cloth. They study the minerals, the dyes. They find out where the materials came from, how the colours were made, what foods were left in jars, what oils were used in embalming. These tools give voice to the things that cannot speak. One of the greatest modern finds came not with treasure but with space. It was called KV5. This was a tomb long ignored. It lay near the tomb of Rameses II. Most thought it was empty, but when archaeologist Kent Weeks returned to it in the 1990s, he found something massive. Tunnels, chambers, over 100 rooms. This was not a tomb for one man, it was for the sons of a king. Rameses had many children. KV5 was their tomb, the biggest in the valley. It had been hidden under rubble, forgotten. But science helped bring it back, and the valley still gives more. In the 21st century, new tombs were found using ground scans. Small shifts in the earth showed where to dig. One find near the tomb of Ai held workers' huts and tools. Another revealed the burial site of a priest. Even now the story is not finished. But discovery is not enough. Time wears down everything. Paint fades, wood cracks, stone crumbles. So conservation is now part of archaeology. Scientists work to slow decay. They clean walls with soft lasers. They control temperature and moisture. They use 3D scanners to record tombs in perfect detail. If a wall fades, the image still survives. This work is shared. Egypt does not do it alone. Museums and experts from around the world come together. They share tools, they share knowledge, they return stolen items. They teach, they listen. The past belongs to everyone. But it lives in Egypt, and now, with science and care, it lives a little longer. Chapter 15. The Valley Today. Protecting Egypt's Greatest Treasure. The Valley of the Kings is still a place of wonder. The tombs are quiet, but they are never empty. Each year thousands of people come from around the world. They come to walk where kings were buried. They come to stand before walls painted more than 3,000 years ago. They come to see what time has somehow not taken away. But time is not the only thing these tombs must survive. People bring breath, people bring heat, people bring moisture on their skin and in the air they carry. When thousands visit in a day, the tombs begin to feel it. The paint on the walls starts to flake, the stone begins to sweat, colours fade, cracks form. This is the great challenge now, how to welcome the world but protect the past. Tourism is part of Egypt's life. It brings work, it brings money, it brings pride, but it also brings pressure. Some tombs are closed to rest, others are open only a few hours a day. Some have glass walls to keep visitors from touching the art. Some have limited tickets. The balance is hard. Too many people and the tomb suffers. Too few, and the country loses part of its livelihood. This is where science steps in. Modern tools now help where hands cannot. Inside the tombs, scientists watch the air. They measure the temperature. They track the humidity. Even the breath of a visitor is counted. Machines remove extra moisture. They keep the air steady and dry. This protects the walls, the paint, the story. One of the most famous tombs, that of Tutankhamun, now has a full climate control system. It took years to plan. It runs every day. The goal is simple: to keep the tomb as it was when it was first sealed, or at least close. But technology does more than protect. It also helps preserve in new ways. Experts use 3D scanners to record the tombs. These scanners catch every line, every shape, every mark. They create a digital copy, a tomb made of data. Not just pictures, but full virtual rooms. With these scans, people can walk through the tombs without ever being there. They can explore from home, from a school, from a museum. This is called digital preservation. It means that if the real tomb fades, the image still lives. Some of these models are used to make exact physical copies. These replicas are shown in exhibitions around the world. One copy of Tutankhamun's tomb was built near the real one. Visitors can go inside without risking the original. This idea is growing. But the valley is not only watched by machines, it is also protected by people. More and more, these people are young Egyptians, students, artists, scientists. They are trained in the latest methods. They study the old ways too. They learn how to dig with care, how to read ancient texts, how to photograph a wall without damaging it. In schools and field camps, they work side by side with experts. They are not just learning, they are leading. They are the future guardians of Egypt's past. Because the valley still has stories to tell. Even after more than 100 years of digging, it is not finished. Many tombs remain hidden. Some are just shadows beneath the sand. Others may lie behind walls already found. Technology helps again. Ground-penetrating radar shows signs, a change in the rock, a shape too regular to be natural. This is how the tomb of the sons of Rameses II was found. KV5, the largest tomb ever discovered in the valley. It was first mapped long ago, but only in the late 20th century did archaeologists return. They used new tools. They found dozens of rooms never seen before. It reminds us that the valley still keeps its secrets. Some believe more royal tombs are waiting. Perhaps the tomb of Queen Nefertiti. Perhaps more from the time of Akhenaten. Perhaps someone entirely unknown. This hope keeps the valley alive. It also keeps it fragile. Because each shovel, each light, each footprint touches the past. The valley is a living museum, but it is also a sacred place. Long ago it was built to last forever. And it has, but only with help, only with care. It has survived flood, theft, fire, time, and now it must survive us. Yet even now, when you walk the paths of the valley, something stirs. The cliffs rise around you like stone walls. The sun touches the tips of the hills. The heat presses close, the silence feels deep. Then you step into the tomb, into the cool, into the dark, into the past, and the colours still shine, the gods still stand, the king still sleeps. This is the legacy of the Valley of the Kings. It is not only the story of Egypt, it is the story of what we value, of how we protect, of how we remember. The valley still amazes, still teaches. It asks us to look closely, to move slowly, to listen. It asks us to be worthy of what was left behind.